Hi guys, good morning and welcome to the webinar. My apologies, I'm running a little bit late, just had a slight technical difficulty. I'm Andy, I'm the clinical lead here at ReadyCare, so I kind of oversee all of the data and science and put the therapeutic interventions together for treating heart disease, neurological issues, blood pressure, cholesterol issues in particular, actually weight, type 2 diabetes and so on. In today's session, what we're going to talk about is just getting to the root cause of what exactly causes the clogging up of your arteries. So we've had this kind of rhetoric for the longest time that cholesterol clogs up your arteries, and the inference there, and actually a lot of the public health guidelines wildly, when you look back at it in retrospect, said the ancient ancestral foods that we've had available to us and we've evolved eating for the last couple of million years have suddenly gone rogue and they're just clogging up your arteries for the crack. And that is not what happens at all. It's not what was happening. It's not what's happening now. It never did. So the blame was kind of pointed at saturated fat and cholesterol. And we were told, well, you should probably eat less cholesterol. And now we know from looking at the literature that nothing could be further from the truth. In fact, the foods that you would think would be better for lowering your cholesterol, like avoiding meat and eggs and dairy, and eating more stuff like whole grains and porridge and cereals and granola bars, they could be the most damaging. In fact, they are. There's no doubt about it. They're the most damaging ultimately to your cholesterol levels. What clogs your arteries has much less to do with dietary cholesterol itself and even the cholesterol your body makes itself, and much more to do with the inflammation that's caused. So the question is not what's clogging up your arteries, because we know it's cholesterol. It is definitely cholesterol and calcium and ferritin and various different components that come together that ultimately cause the buildup within your what's known as your endothelial lining. It actually goes under what's known as the subintima. So if this is your artery, it doesn't actually go here like you would see in a lot of depictions. It kind of goes in under the lining here, and that bulges out and causes a narrowing of the arteries, which we call atherosclerosis. So atherosclerosis, or narrowing and hardening of the arteries, doesn't happen because of the cholesterol you're eating just clogging up your arteries for the crack. That's not what happens. So the question is, if it's not dietary cholesterol that's just clogging up your arteries, as it would when you pour fat down a drain, that is not the way the human body works at all, then what is it? What is causing the buildup of cholesterol? And a much better question to ask actually is, what is causing the inflammation that's then driving the cholesterol to try and go to repair that site of inflammation? So the question is not, why is cholesterol building up in your arteries? Because I can tell you the answer to that. The reason cholesterol is building up in your arteries is because it should. It's doing its job. So basically, if you think of cholesterol as, I have a cut on my hand here now, and I'll just show you a really good analogy. So this is from playing too much golf, and I just have a kind of a cut here on my hand from my watch. Now I could say, well, look at that scab on my arm. The scab is the problem. And that is literally the same thing we do with cholesterol, or did with cholesterol for the last 30 or 40 years. I could say, I have a scab, I have a cut on my hand, and I have dried blood. Therefore, blood is the problem. Therefore, we should, have less blood around the body because it's causing that kind of blockage there. But the question is, why is that dried blood there? Why do you get the kind of the scab or the pus and that sort of stuff? And it's because your body is reacting appropriately to a certain level of inflammation that it deems requires to be kept under control. And the same thing happens within your arteries. So within your arteries, what happens is you get a site of what we call an insult, is what they call it, a site of inflammation, a mark of oxidative stress, and you get a little bit of a tear. Cholesterol, calcium, ferritin all come into play, and they try to repair that site. And then you get a buildup over time if that keeps happening again and again. So the question is less, why is cholesterol building up in my arteries and it's clogging up my arteries, and how do I lower my cholesterol? The question is less about that and is more about, how do I reduce the inflammation that is then driving the cholesterol to build up in response? So let me show you a good analogy for this. So this is a analogy I like to use when explaining what actually clogs up your arteries. And the question here is, who started the fire? So, is it the firefighters? No, that seems like a silly analogy, but those guys are always on the scene of a fire. Every time you go to a fire, 9 times out of 10, if you get there within 15, 20 minutes, you're going to have firefighters standing around the fire. And what we've done with cholesterol is we've said, well, every time you open up the arteries of someone who's had a massive heart attack, and this is true, you will see cholesterol every single time. You see cholesterol building up, you see narrowing of the arteries. So it stood to reason, at least if you were looking at it from a kind of a reductionist, oversimplified sort of in an oversimplified manner, a reductionist manner, it stood to reason, at least on a surface level, that you would say, well, cholesterol is the problem. So we need to have less cholesterol. Therefore, you should eat less cholesterol in your diet. But cholesterol doesn't build up in your arteries because you're eating cholesterol. Cholesterol will run through and will establish what we know as homeostasis, which is a lovely balance of exactly how much cholesterol you need. And by the way, you need it on the cellular level. Every single cell in your body uses cholesterol until there's a lot of inflammation. And where there's a ton of inflammation, cholesterol goes along and tries to repair these little nicks or tears or bleeds in the artery by scabbing up. So the problem is not the scabbing up. The problem is not the cholesterol. The problem is the inflammation. So the question becomes now, what causes the inflammation? And actually, overwhelmingly, the literature will show there's a few things that cause a lot of inflammation. Alcohol. And again, I heard someone say in a podcast last week, I like alcohol and I'm very good at it. I'm not putting alcohol down. I do have a couple of drinks every week, minimum. But it does cause inflammation, so you need to kind of balance it out. Smoking, for sure. Stress, definitely as well. Lack of sleep, for sure, will cause an insult. But overwhelmingly, the number one risk factor for causing inflammation is diet. And more specifically, eating processed refined foods like cereals, breads, granola bars, cakes, pastries, donuts. And we've had this horrible myopic focus, which has been pushed by I would say mostly by the big food, as they call it, the food industry, to say, don't worry about people talking about carbs and sugar, right? You need carbs and sugar for energy. And by the way, you don't. So our product, calm down, our product is only 80 calories. Our granola bar is only 80 calories. Our diet yogurt is fat-free and quote unquote healthy. And it's neither of those things, actually. Well, it might be fat-free, but it's certainly not healthy. And don't pay attention to the fact that we've a ton of stabilizers, emulsifiers, Z numbers, and sugar in that product that we're calling healthy because it's low in calories. And I promise you, you can market something as healthy and there is no label or kind of test that you have to pass. There is no law that says that you have to prove on a kind of a cellular level or an inflammatory level that a food is healthy or not. Some of the worst foods for you will be marketed as organic, no added sugar, fat-free. So I'll give you an example. A bowl of no added sugar organic granola is probably one of the worst things you could eat for your breakfast in the morning. It will leave you with about 14 spoons of sugar soaring through your blood, causing all sorts of oxidative stress and damage. Yet because it's low in calories and fat, because of the old 1980 guidelines, you can legally say healthy diet, low sugar, no added sugar, and none of those things are true. Real food is what helps you reduce inflammation. And real food, by real food, I mean fruits, vegetables, meats, dairy. That's it. If you kept your diet to that for the most part, you would be super healthy, super, super healthy. And again, please stop looking at calories and thinking that that's a unit of currency your body uses, because it's just not. As the world-renowned endocrinologist and diabetes specialist and obesity specialist, Dr. Jason Fung, says, calories are not a unit of currency that your body uses. It's actually a number for how much energy does it take to burn a piece of food in a lab using a kind of a calorimeter thing in a lab. It's nothing to do with energy in the human body, really. It's just sort of an equation of two things. But it tells you nothing about how it affects your inflammation, how it affects your body's proclivity for storing fat or conversely burning fat. So it tells you nothing about how that food affects the body. So here's a really good example of why calories are nonsense. You can have an avocado, which has 240 calories, or you can have 2 cream eggs, which has 240 calories. I don't know if that's exactly right numbers, but broadly speaking, it would be close enough. One of them will give you long-acting energy, will give you a ton of vitamins, minerals, antioxidants, will keep you full for a while. and will be really good for you. Will balance out your blood sugar levels, won't cause any inflammation. The other will send you to an early grave if you do it every morning. They're the same amount of calories, and there's loads of examples like that. So real food is an ingredient. It doesn't have ingredients. Meat, including red meats, dairy, especially full fat cheeses, above ground vegetables, even the odd bit of sweet potato and potato, berries, dark chocolate, avocados, chia seeds. These are all foods that have one or two ingredients. Now look at the side of even a sliced pan, whole grain. You will see about 18 ingredients. Much of them you can't pronounce, let alone have any hope that your digestive system knows what to do with them. So the main driver of inflammation is the question that we want to ask. We don't want to ask, why is cholesterol building up in your arteries? We know why cholesterol is building up in your arteries. Anytime there's an insult or there's oxidative stress. So basically, just think of that as a scab. Anytime there's a scab like this within your arterial wall, your body rushes, like it's done here now. It's changed the color. It's caused a bit of a scab. It's healing up over time. If I keep insulting this injury here, if I keep scratching it, if I keep wearing my watch, if I keep playing too much golf, that's going to get worse and worse and worse and worse. And I'm going to end up with a big, horrible scab all over here. The same thing happens in your arteries. So the question is not, why the hell does this thing keep scabbing? How do I reduce the things that cause the scab? The question is not that. It's not why does it keep scabbing. The question is what's causing the injury or the scab in the first place. And the exact same thing with cholesterol. Cholesterol is doing exactly what it should. There's a great health science guy. He goes under the name Metabolic Mike, and he always says, your body never goes rogue. I mean, almost never, with the exception of, a genetic anomaly. And even then, the body is doing what it was told to do in a sense from a genetic coding point of view. So when you get high blood pressure, when you become diabetic, even if you get like an awful illness, your body is responding to environmental triggers. It's not just going rogue and going mad. So sometimes people say, oh, high cholesterol is in the family, so I just need to go on a medication. Not true. There's a genetic predisposition to ending up with being sensitive to the environmental trigger that causes high cholesterol, but there's no such thing as someone who has to get high cholesterol or is just going to get high cholesterol. So the question here is not but the question is not why is the scab building up? It's what's causing that insult in the first place. And that is overwhelmingly processed, refined carbohydrates. Overwhelmingly. Industrial seed oils would do it as well. So this is just an interesting fact a lot of people don't know. But cholesterol doesn't actually build up in your arteries, so to speak. So if you look over here on the left, you'll see the one that says watch video here. So this is the incorrect representation of what happens in your arteries, yet everybody throws this out there. It's in loads of images. If you search for it, even in medical books, they have this. This is cholesterol building up in your arteries, and you might say, well, I should eat less cholesterol then, and it won't build up in your arteries. And that's incorrect. To the right on both top and bottom images is what happens. So you get inflammation in the arterial wall, and the inflammation, your body trying to keep the artery clear, happens in behind the first layer, which is only one cell deep, and that's known as your subentima. And then you get the kind of plaque buildup inside the artery walls that kind of eventually at the bottom there is starting to lead to a blockage or a heart attack. So again, if you slice that artery open down the bottom, you would see loads of cholesterol, and you go, you shouldn't have eaten so much cholesterol. Yet there's not a significantly difference, not a clinically significant difference between rates of heart attacks in vegetarians and meat eaters. Vegetarians, bear in mind, eat like 90% less dietary cholesterol. There's no clinically significant difference between rates of heart attacks in the two. Now, some papers show vegetarians been slightly less likely to have heart attacks, and that's something known as a healthy user bias. So if you've ate a vegetarian diet because you thought that cholesterol was clogging up your arteries, you're likely a kind of a more health conscious person anyway, as opposed to someone going, I'm going to eat a ton of meat. I don't care if people say it causes heart disease and cancer. And by the way, it doesn't. So healthy user bias means vegetarians are way more likely to exercise more, way more likely to do yoga, way more likely to take supplements, way more likely to be health conscious as a general rule. So any sort of increased or decreased rate of kind of heart disease that you see in vegetarians is likely to do with that. I mean, you wouldn't believe the amount of vegan and vegetarian patients that we get who are referred to us because they're diabetic or have heart disease. It's a high number. It's a much higher number than you would think. So cholesterol is not the problem. And And again, just as a quick overview here, all of the guidelines have changed, thank God, over the last number of years. So this is a conclusion on the largest ever meta-analysis on saturated fat and heart health. So I'll break down what meta-analysis means because it's important to know. You've got the highest level of trial is something known as a randomized control trial. The highest level of evidence, which is basically you take 1,000 people, you split them into two groups of 500. You get one group, in this instance, eating loads of meat and saturated fat for a year. On the other group, you get a group randomized to you're going to eat no saturated fat and no red meat. And then you publish your results. And there has to be clinically significant difference between the two groups. And this is a meta-analysis then. It's where you take all of those studies, the highest quality ones, and you pick 40 or 50 of the highest quality ones that went on for the longest period of time and had the biggest numbers. And then you do an analysis of all of them together. So this is a meta-analysis of studies showing that there is no significant evidence for concluding that dietary saturated fat is associated with an increased risk of coronary heart disease or cardiovascular disease. And what this means is that there's no significant evidence. And I want you to let this sink in because this is the biggest study ever done from the Journal of the American College of Cardiology. They published it in 2010 and again in 2020, just reinstating their facts. Despite the fact that you see labels saying high in fat and the color coding on all the things you buy in Aldi and Tesco's, despite the nutritional guidelines of the last 30 years, there is no significant evidence for concluding that milk, cream, full fat cheese, butter, lard, any of that sort of stuff increases your risk of heart disease. None at all. In fact, there's a ton of evidence showing that dietary carbohydrate and in particular sugar are the main drivers of heart disease. So again, this is stated specifically, actually explicitly stating that several foods which are rich in saturated fatty acids, such as whole fat dairy, dark chocolate, and unprocessed meats, are not associated with an increased risk of heart disease or diabetes. So again, this is one that takes people a bit of time for it to sink in. I mean, I've done this as a clinician for a decade now, and even still publishing papers and this stuff, I'll have strawberries and cream and go, this just doesn't feel right. It's just, I'm so brainwashed, even though all my bloods have been perfect since I started eating this way. Foods rich in saturated fatty acids, such as whole fat dairy. Whole fat dairy, by the way, full fat Greek yogurt, cream, butter, full fat cheeses. And unprocessed meat, including red meat. So they're not talking about, salami sticks, or they're not talking about, deep fried sausages, but they are talking about steak, are not associated with an increased risk of heart disease. And we know why now. And again, this is the cholesterol guidelines from the USDA. USDA just stands for United States Dietary Association. So their guidelines around food in 2015 to 2020, they did a massive review, and you can see the highlighted, well, badly highlighted by me from that paper. As a result, the 2015 to 2020 guidelines for Americans removed the recommendations of restricting dietary cholesterol. So basically, if you have heart disease, eat 12 eggs a day. Makes no difference. Makes absolutely no difference whatsoever. So to date, extensive research has not shown or did not show evidence to support a role of dietary cholesterol in the development of cardiovascular disease. So we know now it is not cholesterol in foods that's clogging up your arteries. Now, having said that, and this is where it's really important to pick someone who you feel is an expert in the area, may have publications. I'm talking about us or someone else, some doctors that you find on YouTube, who you feel, God, these guys really seem to know what they're talking about. Because if you do that and you stick with someone who is either got awards for doing what they're doing or published papers, as someone who really seems to be on top of their game, the reason you need to do that and trust a clinician or trust a particular group is if you Google what foods should I eat less of to reduce my risk of heart disease, you will see eggs, butter, cream, cheese, red meat all the time. So the guidelines haven't changed. The hundreds of thousands of blogs and papers that are out there citing the old evidence hasn't changed and won't change over the next decade or so, or will slowly change, I should say. So you need to know who you trust and who you believe. But just in case you think we're out on the fringe, look up Dr. Ken Berry, look up Dr. Paul Mason, look up Dr. Asim Malhotra, Dr. Anthony Chafee, Dr. Sean Baker, the list goes on and on and on. Dr. Gary Fettke, F-E-T-K-E, I think. There's hundreds of doctors who are all of this kind of same opinion. This is not a fringe idea. It's just that much of the research and a lot of clinicians haven't caught up yet. Okay. So this is a slide that I love because this has really encapsulates the whole theory that I'm talking about here, or sort of science, I should say, not really theory, the kind of how much the science has changed. This paper should have a long time ago put to bed the idea that dietary cholesterol is the main driver of heart disease and that we should be focusing on cholesterol levels and in particular LDL cholesterol. This study followed, I think, 8,000 middle-aged men who'd had a heart attack over about 30 years. So this was a phenomenal study in terms of the way it was designed. So what they said was they advertised, we're enrolling to try and figure out what are the main drivers of heart disease and what gives you the greatest risk of having a second heart attack. And what they did was they took patients, you could only enroll in this study if you had a heart attack. So you have a heart attack and you go, I'll do this study. And what they say is, we're going to track your bloods every year for 30 years. And then we're going to do data analysis and see, was it people with the highest cholesterol? Was it people with the highest blood pressure? Was it the highest LDL cholesterol, so-called bad cholesterol, that were more likely to have a second heart attack? And what was amazing about the study, and actually for people who weren't as clued in with the kind of physiology, and to be fair, not many people were back then. This is, I think, 10 or 12 years ago. It amazed people. But having high cholesterol, so what I mean by that is the number that your doctor says, which by the way is just useless, tells you nothing about your risk of heart disease. The total number of cholesterol, your HDL and your triglycerides do, that's different. HDL is good cholesterol, triglycerides are fats that spill out from the liver when you eat too much sugar and processed carbs, not fat. They tell you a lot about your risk of heart disease. Cholesterol itself doesn't. So when a friend of mine says to me, what do you think about my cholesterol at 6.2? I'd say, what do you think about my carbs? Blue. And I do that as a kind of a thought-provoking response, because they'll say, huh? What do you mean? You didn't tell me anything about the car. And I'd say, you didn't tell me anything about your cholesterol. The total number tells you little or nothing about your risk of heart disease, because your HDL and your triglycerides are the main numbers you want to focus on. Although the thinking of the last 30 or 40 years was that it might just be the total cholesterol number that increases your risk. We know now it doesn't. So this surprised some people until you start to understand the physiology and the pathophysiology more specifically, and then it makes sense. So this is a study that showed that having high total cholesterol did not increase your risk for having a second heart attack. So what that means is, if Paul or John or Steve or Mary or whoever, Patricia, if their cholesterol was 4 or if their cholesterol was 11, it made no difference to the risk of a second heart attack. Now, I said this to my doctor when we were discussing cholesterol levels. I was in for something totally different. I don't see him all too often, but I decided he made a comment on my cholesterol. He said, your cholesterol is whatever it was, 6.2. And I said, so? And he said, you should probably go on a statin, cholesterol lowering medication. And I said, why? And he said, to reduce your total cholesterol. And I said, why would I do that? And he said, well, reduce your risk of heart disease. And I said, what literature is there to indicate that reducing my total cholesterol will reduce my risk of cardiovascular disease? And he looked at me as if to say, I don't know, like just no clue at all. I said, my HDL is high, my triglycerides are low, I have no family history, I have no inflammation, I'm not diabetic, I don't have weight around the midsection, I don't have high blood pressure. What makes you think I should lower my cholesterol? And literally we had a 15-minute discussion, and he said to me, and I quote, I won't say his name, look, to be honest, I don't really know, but that's what the guidelines say that we're to do. So the person who most people trust the most in this area told me, and I quote, I don't really know what I'm talking about. I just know that my protocol is, if cholesterol over 5 equals statin, equals chemical. So there you go. Anyway, no increased risk if you had high total cholesterol, no increased risk if you had high, quote unquote, bad cholesterol. And LDL is not bad cholesterol. We know that now. If you had high blood pressure, it doubled your risk for heart disease. That's well understood. If you had high insulin, now, I'll tell you why this is important. Insulin is produced by the pancreas when you eat sugar and carbohydrate. So when insulin is high, it's high because you ate a granola bar, Weetabix, crunchy nut cornflakes, a sandwich with a bar of chocolate. It's high because you've eaten sugar and or carbohydrate. And sugar and carbohydrate are basically the same thing. So people say, oh, well, like I would never eat half a tub of Ben & Jerry's, but like I could have 3 sandwiches a day. Same thing. Broadly speaking, all right, the spike from ice cream is going to be more pronounced. It's going to be up and straight down. The spike from the sandwich is going to be up and down, and then later up and down, and then later up and down. But ultimately, you're slowly releasing in the same amount of sugar. And the reason for this is, and this is so important to understand, dietary carbohydrate, with the exception of insoluble fiber, which is a tiny fraction of what you eat, is metabolized as sugar in your body. It's the same thing. So your sandwich, your bananas, your potatoes, ultimately are boiling down to sugar in the blood. So when you're eating those foods, you're going to have higher insulin levels. So my main bit of advice is, when it comes to reducing your risk of heart disease, is get your insulin under control. It's massively important, hugely important. So again, high blood sugar levels cause inflammation, high blood sugar levels cause weight around the midsection, high blood pressure, disturbances in your cholesterol levels, more specifically low HDL, high triglycerides, sleep apnea, polycystic ovarian syndrome, many cancers, fatty liver, the list goes on. The list goes on. It's the reason we have a chronic disease epidemic in the Western world, but we don't see it in remote tribes around the world. Eat real food. Guys, I love this stuff. I'm so passionate about it. I could talk about it for days, but I know you're going to be jumping back out to work. I really appreciate you taking the time to watch this little mini seminar on what clogs up your arteries, and ultimately eat real food. That's what I want you to do. Eat your meat, eggs, cheese, ideally above ground vegetables with less of the below ground vegetables, more raspberries, strawberries, blackberries, less of the bananas and tropical fruits. If you can keep that as most of your diet, you're going to be dramatically healthier. Guys, have a good day. Thanks again for joining me. Really appreciate it. And I'll see you soon. Take care. Bye-bye.